Hi everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Silhouette Secrets Plus, and today I want to talk a little bit about the process that went into creating the new, it's a DIY stand for the Cameo Pro. If you've seen the Cameo Pro, you know that it is a big machine. It's a 24-inch cutting machine. We'll take a look at that here in just a second. I received the Cameo Pro in September, and I have this table, which you have seen if you've seen any of my other videos. It's what I use for my videos, and it's an IKEA stand that we found on Facebook Marketplace. It works great. It's kind of rickety though. We had installed wheels underneath it, and these are the wheels. They weren't heavy duty. For the time being, for about 2 months, my Cameo Pro sat on this, and it fit just perfectly for the width in order to use the roll feeder with the Cameo Pro. Now, there's a couple reasons that this style of table wasn't the best fit for the Pro at the time. It worked for me to be able to test on rolls of adhesive vinyl or working with HTV. But when you get into working with the Cameo Pro with a 24-inch cutting mat, that cutting mat needs to be fully supported, and it cannot work against gravity, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But there was a couple issues with this. I had been moving this table back and forth away from the wall. I did hit the wall a couple times with the mat because I would forget to pull it out. And then one time a few weeks back, I did pull it. I hit the wall with my cutting mat with just a 12-inch cutting mat. It makes a terrible noise when you do that. But it happens to all users. Even if you have a normal sized Cameo, if your machine's too close to the wall or too close to an object behind it, if that mat hits it, it's going to throw the cut off. For me, the wall didn't give, so it made a terrible noise. One of the wheels popped out. So these were wheels that my husband had put on this stand for me to use. The purpose we got the stand for was to do the videos or to teach when I was holding classes in my house. So now it's still a great workstation. It works for me. I don't want to get rid of this. I kept telling him that. But my husband and I sat down and started to just brainstorm. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it off. You'll see I have it on some casters, but especially because I have things stored on it, that could also be one of the reasons that the wheels fell off, is because when I have a shelf, I will be that person who maxes out the capacity on that shelf with different project tools and supplies. So I'm going to slide this out of the camera. And it'll still work for me. And then this is the Pro stand that we have put together. Okay, so we designed this with a couple of things in mind. When we first started brainstorming, I did tell my husband that there was a few things that I wanted to be able to do with this. The first and foremost was that it was a do-it-yourself, so it needed to be something that could be completed with a few basic tools. We are lucky that my husband is a wood crafter by a hobby, so we have a lot of power tools and different things in the wood shop. If you've followed me on my Facebook page, you've seen me share a few of those things when I run out and jump into his wood shop for some projects. But not everybody has that. So that was one of the first things that we wanted to keep in mind, is that this can be completed with just a few basic tools. If you do not have a power saw at home or a table saw, you can have the plywood for the tabletop cut down at your local hardware store. If they do that for you, you take the dimensions that you need, have them cut that down for you, and that's the biggest piece. And then the rest of it can be cut with a handsaw and a miter box, and then put together with a drill. I'd recommend a drill, otherwise it's going to take a lot of elbow grease. It can still be done with the hand tools. It will just take you a little bit longer time than if you're using power tools. But it is a project that you could complete with basic tools. So any user could do this. So when we designed it, the first thing that we wanted to keep in mind was I wanted a workspace that the machine was stable on. It is 34 to 35 inches wide, and you do want the full width of that machine stable. You want it on a stable table. You do not want it to wobble. You do not want it to be only half supported. It does have little feet underneath it, but you need this full machine stabilized. For what you have invested into this machine, I want you to keep it safe. So you want to make sure that you have it on a stable workspace. For the majority of what I would use it, and for most users I think, for some it's going to be your only machine, and that it'll work just fine. When we go through all this stuff, you'll be able to pick up some tips. But for me, most of the time, I would be using the roll feeder with a 24-inch roll or a smaller roll. So having a workspace on the top that fits the machine safely and stably, and then has enough support that I can also use a 12-inch cutting mat with the mat support in the middle. It's going to provide the stability you need for the 12-inch cutting mat. So this is the majority of how I would use my Cameo Pro most of the time. Now there are projects, and I'll pull in my 24-inch cutting mat here, and we'll talk about that. The reason that you need the stability for it is when you're using a 24-inch cutting mat, let me grab that. This 24-inch cutting mat is a full 24 by 24 inch cutting space, and you have a little bit of excess, so it's a little bit longer. So you need to have that fully supported when you're cutting. And so we've designed this so we have extensions. And it has to be supported not only on the front of the machine, but also on the back side. You want this cutting mat to be rolling in and out of the machine as flat as possible. We'll talk about this here in just a second. So with this 24-inch mat, let me unlock this again and show you why. So with a 24-inch mat, it's a big mat. So if you are using the mat, and I load this in my machine, if this is hanging down, this is 12 inches or more by 24 inches of excess weight with your material on top of it, so that's even more weight. It cannot work against gravity. So you're going to find, if you're using your cutting mat when it's hanging over the edge, that your cuts don't line up. In my experience, it was about 1/4 of an inch off, and so that can vary greatly in wherever your design is placed or how large your design is. So we designed it so that you have an extension. It's feeding your mat with the mat support in here. It's stable up to here, and then it's rolling in as flat as possible. This is going to give you your best results. You want to keep in mind you need the clearance in the front. You also need the clearance in the back. So you want your mat, when it goes through, needs to be supported in the back as well. If it's not, now it won't come out completely this far, but if it's not, then you're going to have issues as well because it's fighting against gravity. Now I'm going to put this aside. So we have installed locking hinges on it. I would not suggest weight bearing. I can reach under and push the lock and then just put it down when it's not in use. So for the majority of the time that I use my machine, my wings will be down, my extensions. So I can easily move this around my workspace if needed. We've installed heavier duty wheels on it since we had problems with the other ones. That is because I have a tile floor. So when I'm moving it, it needs to be able to be securely moved as well. When it catches on the grout, you can hear it in the video, I'm sure. So I'm going to put this down. So, like I said, I wouldn't suggest those be weight bearing. If you wanted it to be weight bearing, you could install longer arms, locking arms for that. You would have to consider how easy it is to unlock those for someone like me. You saw I just reached under and pressed both of those to unlock them at the same time. So, this works the majority of the time. I can roll this to its home, its location, and I wouldn't put it right up against the wall, but I can roll this back towards the wall in the location I want it. So this is going to work the majority of the time for my purpose. If I'm using a 12-inch cutting mat, it's still going to be supported here. It's got enough space on the front that it's still supported. The only thing I would think about is I might pull it back out a few inches from the wall so it doesn't hit the wall. This is going to be important for any Cameo or portrait user. You always have to consider the clearance behind it. If there isn't enough clearance, your cutting mat or your vinyl is going to hit something behind it and it's going to throw your cuts off. So the other thing I liked about this, I just didn't want empty space underneath it. I wanted it to be useful, and I needed a place to store my 12-inch vinyl. So I asked him to consider that when we were discussing the instructions and in how we did it. So all we did was we installed a shelf on the bottom, and so you can see I have my 12-inch rolls stored under there. Now I don't have a whole lot of stock in that at the moment. It would just depend, but you can see that the clearance, it's clear, it is out of the underneath the extender, and I can see that my kids have already decided to throw dirty socks on it. So like I said, this is the multi-purpose room. During the week it functions as a virtual schoolhouse, and then I have my Pro, and this created a easy space for me to be able to have the Pro out of my way but still functional and off of my main workspace. The other thing I'm going to do is, and I'll have a photo, is I wanted storage on the stand for the cutting mats, but since the top is designed out of plywood, you really can't nail anything into it, or it's just not going to hold anything. You're going to split out the plywood the way it's constructed. So I just picked these up. These are command strips. They say they hold 3 pounds. I'm going to try them out, test them, and I'm going to install them behind my machine on the wall. I'm going to place them down so that you can't see it behind the machine, so it's not an eyesore. And then I'm going to hang my cutting mats back there so they have a storage. Grab this again. As you can see, it's pretty long. So if I hang it on the wall, it does have 2 little hooks or holes where I can hang this onto something. So I'm just going to hang those on the wall. We're going to see how many cutting mats I can actually get on those 3-pound hangers. So we have storage underneath for our rolls. We have our machine that's stabilized. And we have the do-it-yourself Cameo Pro stand. This all costs less than $200 for us to put together. We'll have the exact costs all itemized out in the blog post or in the PDF document that we're providing, and it has the instructions on how we completed this. We're going to be as detailed as possible so that you could follow along with those. All I did was I found some paint in the oops section and painted this since it's plywood. The type of plywood you get is going to vary cost-wise, and I did ask for a little higher quality plywood. And then I found the oops paint and I painted it. I did do a coat of wipe-on poly just once on top just because I had it, but it's really not necessary. My machine is going to stay here. It's not going to move. It's not going to be, it has its own stand. It has its own home now. I hope even if you don't build your own stand, that this gives you some ideas on what you really need to support your Cameo Pro and to make it as stable as possible so that you get the best cuts possible and best quality cuts out of your machine, especially if you're using that 24-inch cutting mat. So I hope you took some ideas from this and it has given you something to think about. If you do build it, we'd love to see your photos of your stands. You can feel free to post those on my Silhouette Secrets Facebook group or put a comment down below that you've done it. We'd love to see those photos. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great day.